imagine a way out of inequality, pollution, human rights violations, and any other assortment of dread-inducing buzzwords. But maybe we just aren't being creative enough. In a 1967 sci-fi novel, Lord of Light, there's a group of revolutionaries, way off in the future, who want to take their society to the next level. They believe they can do so through swiftly altering the social attitudes people carry about technology. Instead of fear of the unknown, we should put our foot on the gas and see where it takes us. They called themselves accelerationists. Accelerationism is the real-world belief that technology and capitalism should be sped up. This is either because they genuinely think this is a good idea that will result in some sort of techno-capitalist utopia, or because there is simply no alternative. We can either prolong our suffering or go right through it. Hence, they push for deregulation, the merging of the digital with the human, and the overall rejection of the belief that we can somehow control progress. Current accelerationist circles have even argued that the election of Trump, a hyper-capitalist, anti-establishment figure, is the first true manifestation of their movement in politics. Where did this begin exactly? Many point to the mysterious philosopher and writer Nick Land as the source of the movement. Land was a young professor at Warwick, already known for his eccentricity, love of Nietzsche, and his propensity for climbing over chairs. He would tell his lecture audiences that he worked in the field of the collapse of Western civilization studies, and he would also get extremely high in his office. Reading everything he could get his hands on, Land quickly consumed all of Deleuze and Guattari's work, including Anti-Oedipus, as well as the work of Lyotard. These thinkers emerged at a time when the leftist project appeared futile. In Anti-Oedipus, Guattari and Deleuze wrote about the left's need to acknowledge the ability for capitalism to liberate and oppress, rather than simply oppose it at every turn. They suggest embracing the anarchic tendencies of the free market in order to go still further in the movement of the market, to accelerate the process. Lyotard would also write Libidinal Economy, which praised capitalism for its naturalness and that even its most oppressive aspects were enjoyed by its victims. Land was inspired by this thinking and began to form his own philosophy. In 1992, he suggested that capitalism had never been fully unleashed and was always held back by politics, a practice he considered primitive, the last great sentimental indulgence of mankind. He began to form this idea of embracing the apocalypse through acceleration. Land saw capitalism as the motor of modernity, above and beyond any individual movement. This is strengthened by hyperstition, which is what he called the action of successful beliefs and ideas that, once emergent in the culture, give rise to their own reality through apocalyptic positive feedback loops. They are fictions that make themselves true. Capitalism is perhaps the greatest at this through, for example, forming consumer desire for things that aren't actually essential. Capitalism, he adds, reduces the importance of the self. This was an idea that Land was quite comfortable with. As he argued, the individual has now become less important than the system they lived within. The human experience is becoming increasingly irrelevant. This is evident in an early speech of Land's called "Let's Put the Rat Back in Rationality." He argues that we should view death not as a particular event in an individual's life, but rather through the view of the rats carrying the Black Death across Europe, as a world-encircling swarm with no coordinates or individuation. When asked if he is telling us to abandon the human experience, he simply responded that it's worth studying but shouldn't be. Land's thought was only further encouraged by new arrivals at the Warwick Philosophy Department, who equally rejected the optimism of the Californian ideology, which envisioned a world in which new technology unlocked human potential, as well as the traditional leftist view of humanism and rights that pervaded humanities departments. With the help of two young lecturers, Mark Fisher and Seti Plant, they formed the Cybernetic Cultural Research Unit, or CCRU, which operated within a single office in the philosophy department. The CCRU listed these now commonly discussed, but at the time quite niche topics, as their general discussion points, and they would regularly produce cryptic articles with invented terms and convoluted messages. For example, the article Swarm Machines discusses situationists, carbon dating, and describes jungle, an intense genre of electronic dance music. They would also host virtual futures, conferences that acted as a performative way to reject the common discipline and formality of university lectures. For example, in one, Land simply laid down in front of an audience and croaked into a mic while they played Jungle. An audience member reportedly stood up and said, "Some of us are still Marxists, you know," and stormed out. As time passed, the CCRU became more and more despised. Land would leave the department and continue the work of the CCRU above a spa body shop. There, the group drifted from accelerationism towards the occult, a move likely inspired by their abusive use of amphetamines and alcohol. They would move into the Satanist Aleister Crowley's old house and spend the nights drawing satanic diagrams on the wall. After several mental breaks, the members, including Nick Land, disappeared from the public eye, and the CCRU was officially disbanded. The first half of Nick Land's life is still considered to this day to be a radical extension of leftist thinking. Members of the CCRU, such as Mark Fisher, had continued their work with great success. For example, Fisher would go on to establish a theory that continued to argue for the acceleration of capitalism, but suggested it be channeled towards an altered modernity, based on automation, reduced working hours, and UBI. Land, re-emerging in China years later, would criticize this left accelerationism, stating that the notion that self-propelling technology is separable from capitalism is a deep theoretical error. That's right, Nick Land moved to China. There, he has since appeared far more pro-government and has gone on to write that China is a fundamentally accelerationist society fixated on the future and speed. More significantly, Land has expanded on his views of accelerationism through his piece entitled The Dark Enlightenment. In it, he argues that freedom is incompatible with democracy and that there is no value in democracy left. Instead, he pushes for a post-libertarian future which embraces authoritarianism. Specifically, he wishes for an ideal state that can be considered to be a capitalist monarchy or GovCorp, in which the state is controlled by an authoritarian CEO who manages the state through what Land called rational corporate governance. What about some semblance of human rights or rule of law? At this point in Land's career, such concerns are seen as a hindering to acceleration. Egalitarian policies slow us down when, instead, we should be rushing towards what Land calls the techno-capitalist singularity. This anti-egalitarian embrace has united Land's current ideology of what he calls neo-reactionism with the alt-right. Neo-reactionaries tend to believe in the replacement of the modern nation with authoritarian city-states that value genetic fitness and intelligence. Such an advocacy for what has sometimes been called hyper-racism, or the belief that some groups will fare better in modern conditions than others and should be accelerated out of existence, has been seen as obviously controversial and hateful. Nick Land insists that the opportunity for viable ethno-supremacist politics disappears into a logical abyss. What to make of Nick Land? It's rare to hear of someone so brutally honest about the state of the world and the future. It's also equally rare to hear of someone who appears to embrace the speeding up of everything that is popularly considered to be bad, or at the very least, concerning. And there's a peculiarity to Land's tone, so comfortable with disregarding the human experience and the individual, that leaves one uncomfortably in agreement with the idea that the human era is drawing to a close. His thoughts drift between crude, especially when describing race, to uniquely insightful, such as when he discusses the implications of capitalism on the self. Accelerationism has found support in environmental and Marxist circles, and has also been blamed for white supremacist attacks and informing Steve Bannon's worldview. Perhaps Nick Land is the perfect representation of that dark, self-imploding subpsyche lingering within all movements that struggle to understand, to advance, to hope in a world of speed and transformation. Sometimes it's freeing to know that we can just stop trying and simply let go of the wheel. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's right.